My observation at the time is, I had a background in nuclear stuff, pretty deep as well. And my observation at the time was, because I wasn't working the war on terror at that point in time, when I was in the intelligence community, and I kind of felt like that it had kind of consumed tactics and thought so much that the greatest single threat to the homeland was, kind of the jihadi threat.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, China was quietly building their economy, their production capacity across all facets of manufacturing.
Yep.
And if you look now, I don't know if it's half fake because I'm not in the game anymore, and I wouldn't say if I was, but they are building a lot of new ICBM things. I don't know if it's part, there's a real one for 10 fake ones. I don't really know that to be the case, but I think as we've exited out of this, kind of sole focus on counterterrorism, I think with the Russia-Ukraine thing and China, I think it's clear how important how they're brutally horrible weapons, fine, but we haven't had a world war since they came out. We've had a lot of wars, but not a world war. And to your point on unarmed conflict deaths, I'd be curious, what'd you learn about Russia in the NSC? And obviously, they put a lot of focus on their nuclear weapons, even above their conventional forces, by a lot, because they know they can't match our conventional capability or spending and that of NATO. But I kind of felt like they were continuing to innovate on the nuclear side, the strategic side. When I agree with you, my experience was in my time working with the labs was one where it was, oh my gosh, we're on this like tipping edge of losing capacity to do new stuff again, where there was a brain drain. A lot of the men and women who were in there were retiring. I mean, it was pretty shocking at stuff they were trying to relearn that we built 40 years ago.
Yeah. So the story that kind of, one of the first things I realized, and this was before I got to the NSC at DOE, that you can write down all this great knowledge, and your grandmother can give you the recipe for her wonderfully tasteful chocolate chip cookies.
Right.
But something's missing. And that's grandmother's experience on how to make a killer chocolate chip cookie.
Right.
And so you're exactly right. We've had a tremendous brain drain because we've discounted the value of our labs and nuclear deterrence.
Right.
We're young people, all of us, but particularly young people, like the old Andy Griffith show. Right. Youngins are attracted to something that's glitzy and glamorous and looks exciting. And who wants to go work at a laboratory where everybody tells you, yeah, this is dying, we don't need it anymore, and just a bunch of old dead people in there. And so that is a generational problem for us being able to overcome.
Right.
And particularly when the highest levels of the government do not understand or appreciate how we got to where we are. The Russians, as much as I don't have a lot of admiration for the Russians, they have put a lot of brain power and a lot of technology into their nuclear business.
Right.
President Eisenhower in the 50s realized that we do not want to go toe-to-toe with the Russians in a conventional fight.
Right.
So we're going to invest in these nuclear weapons, and we're going to keep them at bay because we've got a bigger, stronger nuclear arsenal. We're not going to fight you like they did at Pickett's Charge in Gettysburg.
Sure.
We're just going to lob some nukes at you guys and end the whole thing. Well, we have gradually walked away from that and put a lot of emphasis in our conventional capability, where the Russians, they put some into their conventional capabilities, maybe not as much as we thought, seeing how they're stumbling in Ukraine.
Another great intelligence failure, which disturbs me greatly, unfortunately.
Excuse me. Right. Yeah. But they have invested in their nuclear capability, and it's formidable.
Right.
Because they don't want to go conventional with this because they know they can't.
Right.
So, I don't want to criticize, because part of my responsibility is to not allow us to get into positions that are bad for our country.
Right.
But we kind of brought that on ourselves. We've walked away from what's kept us the foundation of our national security. And at the same time, we've watched the Chinese and the Russians do exactly what we did in the 50s. I mean, how much more of a template does your adversary need than just for you to give it to them?
Right.
And I do wholeheartedly appreciate being kind and generous and dignified to other people that I don't understand.
Sure.
But there are limits to how stupid am I going to allow myself to be?
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't mean to be so provocative, but we have not, as a society, appreciated counterproliferation, proliferation, strategic deterrence. And hopefully we have the time that we can get that straightened out. But as the whole value of your podcast is that technology is changing 4 to 7 times faster than it's ever changed before.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid that the human mind is no longer able to contend with a new invention, a new device, a new tool that comes out tomorrow. The change is quicker than what we can
Right.
assimilate and think through. So we don't have two oceans that protect our space assets, our cyber infrastructure, our military. And a technology could just change something overnight. And now we don't have time to reinvest in whatever device that we need, capability that we need in order to keep our society going. Now, I don't mean to lecture,
Right.
but we have to be conscious that it appears to be that there have been some great societies from the Chinese civilizations all the way to the American civilization of today.
Right.
The ancient ones lasted hundreds and thousands of years.
Right.
As we get closer and closer to 2022, seems like those great civilizations don't last quite as long as the predecessor did. And the reason is because technology changes on them.
Yeah.
And they aren't able to keep up or take advantage of what that new technology promises. And so your podcasts are hugely valuable for trying to force people to appreciate technology, not be afraid of it, not run away from it, but to figure out how do we take advantage of that technology so that we stay on top.
Right. Yeah, to your point on kind of a lack of appreciation for strategic systems, I think there's a bunch of things coming together. I mean, it seems, and I don't know, I could be wrong because I don't have any inside information, but I feel like we fell a little bit behind on the hypersonic delivery systems. I also think the Russians probably bluffed a little bit on how theirs work. But the one thing that sticks out to me is look what's happening to Russia right now, where the world's squeezing them. They're going to struggle to be able to make new high precision weapons.
Yeah.
If you put us in the position with China, I think one of the things that scares me the most that I feel like needs a Manhattan Project, a moonshot moment, and it has to come from this country. This is personal opinion here, is a bid to absolutely dominate semiconductor manufacturing and bring it back at least into North America into a territory we control. That's one. Generic drug production is another one. Most of our military is using drugs not made here, right? And I think, when you look at, oh, wow, if nation states go to war, even have a Cold War conflict, and they can start squeezing you on these things, because technology is driving warfare so fast, the kind of core tenet of that's the silicon. If we can't produce it here, we can design them all we want. But you look at like Taiwan and South Korea are two big hubs. Well, I wouldn't be banking on Taiwan in a conflict, to preserve that. In fact, the first thing I'd probably do is bomb the foundries so the Chinese don't get it, to be honest with you. It's an area I think really, really, we won the Cold War, I think, by and large because of our ingenuity, our economy, and our ability to create and manufacture technology. I think we've lost a lot of the manufacturing component.
Yeah. So you bring up this a terribly scary future there. I think even in the open press, the evidence is beginning to show that up until recently, the Chinese were pretty good copycats of what we had to offer. And now we're beginning to see clear-cut evidence that they're no longer copycatting. They have gathered that knowledge, And they have now, it's no longer training. That's the difference between a training program, learning how to become a welder, learning how to become a pilot, and learning how to become a philosopher.
Right.
One is an act of creativity, and the other is just something of rote memorization.
Right.
Now, evidence is beginning to point out that the Chinese are becoming creative. And, the old adage, two minds are better than one. Hell, they outmined us 3 or 4 to 1 right there.
Right.
And if necessity is the mother of invention, there's a lot of poor, destitute people, whether it's in China, India, Malaysia, wherever they are, that they've got strong motivation to try to, everything doesn't have to take $1 billion to fix. But unfortunately, in our society where we have a lot of money, we have a tendency to want to do the Winston Churchill thing. You can count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. and so
that's a great
so that puts us at a clear-cut disadvantage. But now, with that being said, in the last 2 or 3 years, bridging the Trump to Biden administrations, such things like the SCALE initiative, the Department of Commerce effort to where they are putting serious money into schools that are teaching and driving chip technology. Not only just the manufacturing of it, but what can we do with chips? How do we do this faster, better, quicker, stronger?
Sure.
I had a discussion with one of the Silicon Valley, I think he's in Santa Clara, but lived in Milpitas. I can't remember.
Sure.
They're in the South Bay area, and he immigrated to the United States about 50 years ago, and he is trying to lead the charge that, we've got to look at this immigration. All of this stuff is tied together. We've got to look at this immigration because we are capturing thousands of people that come to this country to get a better education and a better way of life.
Right.
And then when their educational opportunity is over, we kick them out. They've got to go back. We ought to be finding those that are in those populations that we want to make Americans, that have the knowledge. Why do we want to send them back to where our adversaries are?
Oh, that's the worst. We're literally training them to come compete against us. No, we have to retain. There's no question.
Exactly. And immigration, though, has become such a hard thing to talk about because it's not a black and white. Most things in life aren't black and white. There's nuances and there's some insidious things that happen. And it just requires a thoughtful approach. So I think we are beginning to realize that, hey, we are behind. And we can offshore just the basic manufacturing. Go make me a spark plug. That's not tough technology. But we've got to stop offshoring the creativity, particularly to our adversaries. But we've got supply chain problems, and we've got ball games we want to go to, and we've got a new movie that came out this weekend that we want to go see, and so we kind of don't realize the urgency that's at hand. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, John.
Yeah. It's one question I didn't ask you earlier that I meant to, but it kind of makes more sense, I think, right now is when you look at our kind of low observable platforms, or stealth, as people call it. I'm not sure anything's perfectly stealth, but do you think we're in a situation right now, specifically with the Chinese? I personally can't separate their kind of rhetoric from reality, but they're pumping out a lot of articles basically saying, we can see your planes. You're losing this advantage here. Do you think the aircraft manufacturing can keep up with the technology to detect them? Are we going to run into a point in time when low observable isn't really the game changer in a peer-to-peer? I hate the term near peer because I think you must treat the Chinese as a peer from a warfighting standpoint at this point.
Particularly when you look at the target sets. Am I afraid that the Chinese are going to invade the United States? No. 5 years from now, I might be, but I'm not worried about that right now. But if we have to go do something closer to them, they are peer. Matter of fact, they might even be more successful than peer because we've got some well-identified targets. I don't want to say Guam,
right.
but I could see Guam being held at risk very quickly.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything better in the world than American ingenuity.
Right.
Even with all the rules and regulations and codes that people are frustrated with,
Right.
I understand that. I'm frustrated with them too.
Right.
But we still have the opportunity that people have opportunity. So if you have a great idea and you're willing to work hard at it, have a little bit of luck, you can become somebody in your chosen career field.
Yeah.
Now, the part that I'm worried about is the Eisenhower military-industrial complex has become such a huge animal all of its own that it shouldn't. As an example, it shouldn't have taken Boeing 2 years of grounding their 737 to figure out why 2 planes crashed.
Right.
But the bureaucracy, whether it's government induced, it's just, hey, we like doing the things that we do, not enough financial incentive to fix it, whatever those are, that is as much our enemy as it is the Chinese or some other country being able to catch us and pass us on what our technology is that we're using.
Right.
So we don't have to be this way. We can be quicker and faster if we don't handcuff ourselves quite as much as we're handcuffing ourselves.
Sure.
So
yeah, I know there's probably really good reasons for it, but when I was working with DOE, I used to tell them all the time, can you imagine how much fun it'd be able to work here pre-OSHA?
Yeah.
It's like a year of paperwork to blow something up now.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, really, it was, and that really, one of the things that concerns me with China, and I agree with you, they stole a lot. Now they know how to innovate themselves, and then they can augment a problem they're having a trouble solving by stealing some more. I mean, we watch in our customer base, I'm not going to name the manufacturer, but they made a part for a spacecraft, right? And I watched the Chinese come in. I personally saw this one. I watched them come in. Now we stopped them, obviously, and kicked them out, but they evaded all the automated security products, and they were like, one way you steal intellectual property in manufacturers is you actually go right to the CNC machines that are cutting it apart.
Yeah.
Because that's how you get an engineered, tested product. And that's exactly what they tried to do. They tried to hit the computer that was running the CNC platform to pull a production ready part. And all they have to do is load that up, get the right quality aluminum. In this case, it was an aluminum part, and cut it. And that is something the United States does not do. We do not steal intellectual property and hand it to private entities. So I think there's a combination of, we put $10 in and I think we get like 1 unit of productivity out, and they're able to now innovate at a way cheaper pace with way less of the bureaucracy and overhead. And that's a tough one to unwind. And when you look at, the traditional kind of government contractor relationship and then compare it to like a SpaceX, you're watching how fast SpaceX can innovate. And thank God. I mean, I feel like they in some ways saved our space programs.
Right.
And, and I hear the Chinese, I read a fascinating article that they were calling their scientists to come up with a way to take out the Starlink platform, because they're concerned like an LEO constellation of satellites can actually become really useful sensors, especially for hypersonic missiles.
Right. Right.
Yeah. It's a really, it's a challenging. We got to get the bureaucracy out of the way. I think reinshore some certain really critical technologies. I think we have to go hardcore on the battle for rare earth minerals because they're the core at a lot of making this possible. And unfortunately, while all this is going on and all focus is on China, Russia reared its head in Ukraine, right? And so kind of, I'm sure you know a lot about the Russians with your time both flying strategic platforms and in the NSC. What's your assessment of what's going on now, and how does this end? And do you see any options?
Yeah,
so that's a tough question.
Everybody always says that's a good question when they don't have an answer.
Right.
And if you think back, every time you ask somebody a stumping question, they always say, that's a good question, because I don't have a clue. So, sadly, I think too many decision makers are hoping that rumors of Putin's health, rumors of other oligarchs that don't care for him,
Right.
rumors of his generals getting tired of being taken out,
Right.
that somebody's going to solve the problem for us.
Right.
We heard the same thing about Osama bin Laden. He's
And
got this
Hitler
disease. Yeah,
and
right.
Khomeini. Iran has
Right.
had every disease in the world. He's
Yeah.
still kicking.
And then all those thugs, persist for another 10, 15, 20 years. And so, um, yeah. So Putin has backed himself into a corner. He overestimated either the love that he was going to get from going into the Donbass region,
Right.
or the awesomeness of his military. And he clearly is a type of individual that's driven by ego,
Right.
and so he doesn't have an easy way to get out of this either.
Right.
I'm pretty confident that our diplomats, Secretary Blinken, is working hard to find him a bridge so that he can save himself from himself.
Right.
Now, whether Putin is capable of that much humility, time will say. It's a game changer. He keeps threatening the use of nuclear weapons. He's got them on alert, and
Right.
the childishness that goes around that. I'm pretty certain that that's going to be a game changer. If he decides to put a nuke in Ukraine,
Right.
It'll be devastating for him. Doesn't mean it won't be devastating for other people, which is the fear, but it'll be devastating for him. That'll be a game changer. Now, short of that, how do we get this fixed? I don't know, John. I don't see a way to get it fixed very easily. I've heard a lot of interesting ideas, but I'm not going to call any of them a good idea.
Right.
It's just a horrible situation. I mean, look at Hitler. It took us 4 years to figure out a way that how are we going to deal with this guy? How are we going to get him out of the driver's seat? And this may be one of these things that takes several years. Hopefully Ukraine is able to hang in there long enough for Putin to be taken out of power. That's really the only option.
Can you imagine the Russians with what they've done and the atrocities they committed, holding these ruins of towns in the east? It's going to be the hardest. One, the land's going to be almost useless, and two, it is going to be very expensive to hold.
Yeah,
and bloody.
Right.
That's the scary part of this whole thing. Do you think this is a question I don't think anyone knows the answer to, but there was a lot of nuclear weapons rhetoric early on, and I feel like it's died down. I saw something the other day where they said they wouldn't use tactical nukes, and I think people have a misconception of tactical nukes too. It's still a pretty big boom. Right. Do you think we would respond conventionally then if they crossed that line?
Conventional could be one of the options. Certainly our conventional forces are far superior to anything that he's got. So that might be a way to de-escalate this. Another one might be sort of in kind. That might be what de-escalates it. It gets back to that poker game. The decision makers that are around the table, they have to kind of size each other up and see what do I think I can hang out and what can't I hang out. So we're, as you already know, we're at a disadvantage. If we lose, pick any small town in America, any unknown town in America, if we lose that to some kind of horrible military strike by a foreign country, we're going to have a change of government.
Right.
Unless we actually take out Putin or something that's very, very dear to him. I don't think he cares a bit about the 160 million people that are in his country, so to speak.
Right.
I don't think he cares a bit about anything in Ukraine. So that makes it much, much tougher for us to level that playing field, because our Americans are very valuable to all of us.
Right.
And we won't tolerate losing any Americans. Putin, I don't think he cares who he loses.
He's demonstrated that for sure.
Yeah. And, with today's media the way it is, one of the avenues that, and maybe this will work, that is being bantered about, give Putin the opportunity to declare victory, get his butt out of Ukraine, and you'll be okay. We'll not persecute you, prosecute you.
Right.
He can't be persecuted, prosecuted.
Right.
So we'll let you play the media game. You can declare all the victory and how you saved Ukraine from itself and that you reunited the great evil empire.
Sure.
Play the media game, because there are so many people that buy into every single conspiracy that whether it's truthful or not, it's probably about a wash as to being able to convince people.
Right. Right.
So that, maybe there's something there, John, but
yeah, you touched on an interesting thing, which is media, which I put that in the information operations, information warfare bucket, covert influence, that type of stuff. One thing that I think is wild when you think about, kind of broadcasting, media into a country to, circumvent propaganda. Russia's a tricky one because it's huge and people just don't listen to the radio anymore. They consume data differently. I do think a constellation like Starlink of satellites that could go right to the handset, where you don't have to have a satellite dish. It'd be hard to jam, writ large. That would be, I would think, a strategic endeavor would be wise for the United States when they're dealing with, because it seems like a lot of the Russians believe it's a just war. And because Putin has done give him credit, like he's done a good job at really controlling the narrative and blocking their ability to easily get information from the outside. It seems like that has to be one part of our plan. Tough technology, but I think that's something that could work in a lot of places, for future conflicts.
Yeah, it might. I'm all for trying that.
Yeah.
And there have been a few discussions about that part of the tact.
Right.
So in my lifetime in public service, I noticed starting about 25 years ago that we no longer were electing a president of the United States. We had gotten to where we start electing the president of the Republican Party in the United States or the president of the Democrat Party in the United States. And no matter what good that they did, the opposing party was never going to give them any credit. No matter how bad they were, the home party was going to figure out some way to make it sound like, it was the right thing to do. So it's hard to anymore gauge the finickiness of a nation's citizens. I say give that a try. I think that's a good idea. I think your podcast can maybe feel that out a little bit and see what might happen. Putin obviously is very credible in the re-Soviet Union. Why? There's a number of reasons. Poverty, feeling underappreciated, woe is me, all of that kind of plays into Putin being able to gauge the mindset of how to sell himself to the Russian people. I'm not smart enough to know what's going to break that cycle. Yeah. So, if we can get if we can get Elon Musk to do anything, I say let's give it a try, and we'll gauge and readjust fires and figure out a different way to handle it. But we've got to do something. President Reagan, when I was a new White House fellow, he liked to teach by telling stories. Most of them were deprecating stories, and he told the story once about how as a young professional, he needed a new pair of shoes or needed his shoes fixed up, and he couldn't decide whether he wanted them to have pointed toes or round toes or not. And then, so he never told the cobbler what to do with the toes. And when he came in to pick up the shoes, one had a pointed toe and the other had a round toe.
Right.
And President Reagan would immediately say, right then I realized that indecision by definition is a decision. And so I'm not discounting the brain power and the work of our elected officials and public servants, but we've got to do a more vigorous job of coming up with ideas, figuring out how to test them, and then implement the ones we think got the best results.
Yeah, there's no question, So, staying on kind of the information cyber theme for a second, what's your sense on Russia's use of cyber as a weapon? I know there's all sorts of talk and fear mongering and how they were going to unleash the worst cyber attacks we've ever seen. Why do you think we haven't seen that?
So at the end of the day, there's everything in our lives, each of us, comes down to priorities.
Right.
There's only so much that a person can tackle, only so much that a team can do. Seems like time is so precious that you never can get everything covered. I think the big cyber attack 2 years ago.
I should know, but there's been so many.
I want to say, yeah, right. I want to say fire winds, but that's not it.
Oh, the SolarWinds breach. Yeah.
Thank you.
That was a very clever breach on their part, by the way.
Yeah, stunning. Yeah, stunning. We all ought to be ashamed.
Yeah,
we would be ashamed if we just were a little more sophisticated in our understanding of what all went bad there.
Right.
So, I'm not sure that we aren't being infiltrated and attacked right now.
Right.
Part of that is when do you want to let the genie out of the bottle? When do you want to turn that attack on? Is it the right time now, or do we wait? Right. The other one is, I think SolarWinds wakened a lot of people into thinking, oh my gosh, I've got some problems here that we need to address. And so I think there's been a lot of great defensive work that's been done in the last 18 months, particularly at the federal government level. And then the other part of it is a philosophical change or a philosophical calculation. Is it better to be on the offensive, tie them up, or is it better to be on the defensive to prevent them from tying me up? And how do I balance which one of those I'm going to undertake at any given time?
Right.
To some extent, we get credit to the Reagan administration for bankrupting the Soviet Union because we were forcing them to come up with so many defenses to prevent our offensive capability that they couldn't afford it. Well, sometimes we kind of do the same thing. We want to defend every single thing.
Right.
Every single American life is precious, and they are. So in order to defend everything, that means you have to cultivate a very risk-adverse approach to life. So my guess is that they're doing a lot of work. They're very, very sophisticated, as you know.
Right.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
And that they are scurrying around, but they probably haven't dropped their equivalent of the A-bomb on us yet.
Yeah, they're strategic cyber capabilities.
Yeah, because this is just my own, all of these, I guess, are my ideas, my opinions. But in this case, why would you? Right. From Putin's standpoint, Ukraine's going pretty good. Yeah, so I've lost 10,000 troops. I've lost a dozen generals, BFD.
Right.
I'm getting ready to go out to my villa next week, so things are really going okay.
Right.
So why would I want to do more than I need to do right now? We'll just keep that powder dry. And when things do turn south, then maybe we'll straighten it out a little bit at that time. That's my guess with little evidence.
Makes sense. I think I think the one thing with cyber is you don't just have pure physics involved where I launch this weapon and it lands on target. It
Yep.
fails most of the time when you
Yep.
try to do it. And there's so many to have a successful operation, there's just little windows of opportunity that you have to execute perfectly in.
Yep.
And so I think in some ways it's one, when a nation goes to war, I think they're probably conducting a lot of offensive operations on Ukraine.
Yeah.
Two, there was kind of a vigilante group called the Ukrainian Army, doing great work, if you ask me, but they're really causing the Russians a lot of headaches in their own systems.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I think to your point, it's probably, why would I now cross a threshold and pick such a bad fight with, the Americans on the cyber front when I'm already tied up over here? I do think, though, them, the Chinese, and other sophisticated nations will continue to do, you guys, I'm sure, would call preparation of the environment of their battlefield, which is essentially seeding in capabilities that they can enable at a later date. One thing that I always worry about, because I've thought a lot about, what does the 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 nuclear weapon of cyber actually look like?
Yeah.
Is this an attack against critical infrastructure? And in some cases, I think it could, but I also think those are really hard to pull off. There's a lot of physical fail safes on this stuff as well. I mean, it's not easy to cause mass chaos. What worries me, and what I would love to see our own government focus a hell of a lot more on, is internet service provider backbone. This is the core routing and switching of our internet infrastructure, because the cloud, our on-prem stuff, everything is useless if you can't get there. And when you see some of the largest outages in airlines or Facebook, it almost always comes down to a routing problem.
Right.
And that's the area where I really, really, really would like to see the federal government step up a lot more, because it is in push the envelope and have a lot more innovation research, because this is an area where, the military can wonderfully defend us from a physical attack. The United States government is largely incapable of doing real world operations on the endpoint across our private companies, which are a lot of them are critical infrastructure, and specifically in logistics. I think logistics is probably the area that gets affected the most from cyber, because we're just in time production, just in time delivery, and that's enabled by one thing, which is networked applications, and data. It's a fascinating space, but a space that also requires, I think, a bit of a Manhattan Project type drive. And the other thing, love to know your thoughts on this, because I know you joined for the right reasons, right? Patriotism, you wanted to help. I think in the cyber industry, at the end of the day, it's expensive to live in the United States, and especially in these population centers. And I'm watching an absolute brain drain of talent on the cyber side coming out of the National Security Agency and other places. What do you think about a DOE-like model for cyber professionals, as opposed to just paying a contractor a heavily, massively loaded up rate? Do you think that would ever work? That was one idea I've been thinking about for a while, where you can pay these people their market rate and retain the brain power and talent.
Yeah. So there are some, particularly like you mentioned in DOE, and they're, I don't want to say they're struggling, but they have to deal with this all the time. Albuquerque has become a very high tech area with a lot of businesses that have moved there, and great quality of life and salaries to compensate.
Right.
Livermore is 45 minutes away from Silicon Valley, and
it'd be tough to recruit there.
They get somebody trained up, and then Google or whoever down in the valley wants to offer them twice what they are getting from the federal government. So the particularly the labs, all three of them, Sandia, Lawrence Livermore, and Los Alamos, they are working hard on incentive plans to counter that brain drain.
Right.
And they have taken on more exciting and more vigorous, more meaningful work. The old days of where people didn't appreciate the strategic stockpile that we've got, that's kind of diminished, and so people are seeing the relevancy of what thinking ahead and strategic programs are all about.
Right.
So I think you're on to, John. I think your observation is spot on. There needs to be a new model as to how to look at this stuff. We have lost a lot of what I would say would traditionally be called red-blooded Americans
Right.
that have gone to foreign countries because they get big bucks, and the quality of life might not be the same as it is in America, but they get treated like royalty in some of these places. And I don't want to call them mercenaries, but patriotism is not as it's a perishable commodity.
It is.
And so capitalism still kind of runs the table in a lot of regards. And so, yeah, I don't want to walk away from my responsibilities, but I'm going to make a lot more money. And we've seen money draw. Particularly, we've seen money just influence a lot of people. I was going to use the AQ Con model.
Right.
But money is a driver, and Uncle Sam needs to figure out a way to implement some programs for these critical problems. Now, what complicates that is, we don't want the government claiming everything needs a Manhattan program to go fix a problem.
Right.
We want capitalism to work, but in some of these things that you deal with, you've got to be frustrated that why isn't that company, why isn't that corporation, why isn't that entity investing in this? Don't they understand the vulnerability?
Right.
And they evidently have actuary tables that say, it probably isn't going to happen. So why do I want to waste money in something that probably isn't happening? My quarterly returns are more positively impacted by doing something else.
Right.
And so, where do we draw the line between Uncle Sam directing what other people do?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, it is. And Uncle Sam, just mind your own business. I'll decide for myself what I want to do. Right. And then we find ourselves in a predicament.
Well, I think in the cyberspace, what you'll find is the insurance entities are going to drive a lot, and that'll be just capitalism because they're losing their butt so bad right now.
That's a very good point.
From ransomware. And so I think that's one area that is helping. I think Jen Easterly over at CISA, she's former NSA, very well respected. She's doing a bang up job there, drawing. I think just the challenge is, the government can mostly support and enable defenses, but they can't actually do it themselves very effectively. Yeah. Right? Because at best, maybe you could mess with traffic going over the wire, coming into big, kind of internet service provider stations. But that's the worst way to catch and disrupt hackers is via network traffic. The game's on the endpoint and in the cloud at the moment.
Yeah. So John, I hope you're right. And you probably have more access to gauge the rightness of this.
Right.
The reports that I've seen in the last 6 months, I'm a little appalled at the number of corporations that are beginning to write their ransomware losses to just a cost of doing business. You go to Walmart, somebody shoplifts, they don't even do anything about it because, hey, that's just a part of the cost of having a Walmart store in this area. We're going to lose whatever the percentage is.
Right.
So until that percentage threshold is crossed, I'm a little disappointed that people aren't kind of standing up and say, hell no, stop. We're not going to do this.
Yeah. It's tricky. I mean, what we see when companies get ransomed, it used to be that they just encrypted your computers, right? And then they'd say, pay me and I'll let your computers back. But then people started really investing in smarter cloud-based backup solutions that were harder to disrupt that, the backup. So it started with, I'm going to encrypt you. You're not prepped on your backup. Okay. Now I made my backups good. Now I'm going to target your backups and try and corrupt them. So then backups got better if you implement the latest technology. So the bad guys went to and this is what's getting everyone's attention. I'm going to steal your most sensitive data first and threaten to leak it and encrypt you. And so you're going to have a double whammy. And I think what's going on now is there's been about a 50% drop in insurance capacity in cyber in the past 12 months and a huge increase in demand. And they're bringing down the rates are massively going up. And then the coverage from ransomware is going down. And so because for a lot of companies, a ransomware event is an existential event to the company. especially as you look at the smaller ones and go down market. And so it's really disrupted the insurance market. The good news is it's like you can really bring this attack surface down, but it costs money. And I think what's happening is a lot of businesses, since, to your point earlier, tech changes so fast you can't keep up with it, right? And if you're running a construction company, and even a big one, you're worried about supply chain issues, materials, designs, thinking, and then you just bought a firewall and antivirus and the last stuff your IT guys sold you previously, but you've chosen to connect your network to like the worst neighborhood in the world called the internet, and do commerce over it. And I just don't think people are understanding like how, until they're a victim, how reliant they are on IT to actually be a viable company.
Yeah.
It's changed.
You're right. And that analogy kind of plays across the board in so many walks of life that until that threshold is crossed, hey, I'm willing to just kind of ignore it or not pay attention to it. It's got to cross a certain threshold.
Right.
4 attacks on September 11th, 2001. That crossed a threshold. Up until then, I don't care if there's an occasional plane that crashes.
Right. And I think the Russia nuclear saber rattling and China and Russia launching hypersonic weapons, I hope has woken up folks so they're not making the same mistake with their strategic programs. Because I am a full believer we're not investing enough into them after what I saw personally firsthand. And I would say, now I hope I've been out for a while, so I hope this has changed. I want to be really clear. Like, I don't have firsthand knowledge, but it almost felt like morally, these places were doing great work and not really being appreciated for how important of an instrument of national power they really were. And you got to keep innovating constantly. The day you stop is the day you start dying.
Right.
And I think the Russians continued to innovate a lot while we were kind of hamstrung and abiding by the treaties while they were not, So to kind of wrap this up, you've had an absolutely incredible career, a general officer, a pilot, serving multiple commanders in chiefs, working in the White House. We get a lot of CEOs that watch this podcast and folks that are running business and some small businesses. You have like 3 pieces of leadership advice you could leave them with that will help them lead and run their businesses better and inspire their people.
So there's thousands of books on leadership.
Sure.
And I don't want to try to condense all of those great treatises.
Right.
But 3 areas that I have found that people really don't pay as much attention to in leadership as I think they should. One, the leader has to establish the vision.
Right.
Doesn't maybe have to have it themselves, but has got to find somebody that can establish the vision for the team. The leader's got to find the resources. May not be the one that goes out and buys them, but got to dedicate the ability to get the resources. A third area that is really, really critical is the leader has to represent the team.
Right.
Nobody else is going to cheerlead. Nobody else is going to negotiate with other entities if the leader isn't the one that's representing the team.
Right.
And if I can throw a fourth one in there is to set the standards, because without having the standards, what's to be expected, the leader is the only person that can do all of that.
Right.
That's not discounting. Be honest, be hardworking, be ethical. All of those are very, very critical. But got to have the vision, got to get the resources, got to set the standards. And nobody else is going to do that if the leader doesn't. Right. Otherwise, it's not the leader's team. Now, I did just recently read a book by a historian out of Southern Illinois University named John Shaw. Mm-hmm. And he wrote this. He had like 16 things about Eisenhower. And he titled the book Rising Star, Setting Sun. It's about the transition from Kennedy to Eisenhower. So many differences between the two of those.
Sure.
That it was really a very, very good read, very interesting. There's a Reader's Digest if anybody knows what Reader's Digest is anymore. There's a Cliff Notes version that lists 15 things that John Shaw saw that Eisenhower really excelled at in his 50 years of just phenomenal leadership. And, a little paragraph about each one. That's on the internet. It's easy to find that one.
Excellent.
I think it's at the time President Trump had just become president, and Shaw titled the little article, 16 Lessons Ike could pass to Donald, something like that.
Oh, that's fascinating.
It's very, very, very interesting. Very interesting.
There's a guy who's become a pretty big kind of, I don't know what you say. He has a great podcast, great brand, runs a leadership company. His name's Jocko Willink. He's a former SEAL, I think Commander Task Force Bruiser. He's written a lot of books, and one of his guiding light books, which when I moved back and forth across the country twice a year, back to Maryland and Colorado, one of them is a book named About Face by Colonel Hackworth. I mean, it's massive. I have to listen. That one is another fantastic one, but boy, you got to dedicate some time because it's over 1,000 pages, I think.
Yeah, all of his books are big reads.
Yeah, they're big.
John, if I can throw in one other thing. So,
sure.
Creativity. Certainly creativity has some pitfalls. Not every harebrained idea is a great idea.
It's a good one.
However, people my age, not to be discounting, but we aren't the creative generation. You don't see Bobby Knight, the former basketball coach at IU, out on the basketball floor.
Right.
You see some 18, 19, 20, 25-year-old individual out there on the sports field. That's a form of creativity. Mm-hmm. So most creative things occur from people, whether it's a discovery, an invention, a journey, whatever it might be, are done by people who are pretty young. Right. My responsibility is to help establish the standards and uphold the morals and the ethics of doing that creative work.
Right.
So, I would say to some of your listeners that are running corporations, that are running businesses, small or large, that attract creative people and develop the ability to understand what's really valuable there and what isn't. Right. And the last part of that is we are at an age now where the forgetting curve is probably more valuable than the learning curve. Throughout my life, we always celebrated people who were quick learners.
Right.
Well, I think maybe we need to start celebrating people who are quick to forget, because technology allows us to do things differently than what you did before. And if you want to keep doing it the same way you've always done it, you're going to get the same results. So forget that old way, because there's a much better, faster, quicker, smarter way to do it today. So I'm a big fan of trying to concentrate on finding people who have a quick forgetting curve and not worried too much about the learning curve.
That is some of the best advice ever. We used to have a saying in my old line of work, as soon as we were debating, a mission and how to do it, and someone gives me I've been doing this for 20 years, it's like, boop, you just lost your credibility right there, because that means you stopped learning however many years ago. Like, experience matters, but you do have to be really creative and on top of your game. Well, General George.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Good way to say that and to end this.
Yeah, you're a true American patriot. You served our country, and I thank you for our service. And most of all, thanks for your time here today. It was absolutely fantastic discussion. Well, much appreciated.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate your patriotism and your service. And this continued podcast of yours is just phenomenal. I enjoy listening to it.
All righty. Thank you.